I have written 8 books as of the time of filming this video at the end of 2024, and I wanted to make a video sharing exactly what I learned and what my experience was like writing each of these books and how my process has changed as a writer. I write very differently now than I did when I first started writing books as a teenager, and it's very interesting and helpful to reflect on that and to see exactly what things evolved as I got more experience under my belt and as I learned what works for me as a writer more than other things. Growing as a writer is a very organic process. You don't better your craft unless you're actually going and writing books and using your craft. So I'm going to give you a thorough history of every single book I've ever written, and at the end probably mention some short stories as well that I've written. I haven't written very many short stories. I've only written like 3, or I mean a couple more than that. Like, no, actually I think probably just 3, but the act of writing them has taught me a lot. I was never a short story person though. So full disclosure, I do not write short stories. I have only really ever worked on longer novel projects. But I have my tea. It is snowing outside and it's very cozy, and I'm very excited to just have a little bit of a chat with you all and share with you my own personal writing history, or like very extended resume. Because I still do get some comments on this channel saying like, you look like you're 12. Why would I listen to you give writing advice? And I am not 12. I am 25. And I know that that's still young and I still have a lot to learn about writing, but I do have experience doing what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that what I do is the only way you can do it. And I'm also not saying that what I do now is how I'm going to still be writing in like 15 or 20 years. But that is how you learn writing. It's just by experimenting and trying things. And now I'm stepping off my soapbox, and let's just dive into the video. So out of those 8 books that I've written, I have published 5. It will soon be 6 because the 5th book in the They Stay series will be published shortly. I still haven't put that up for pre-order, but I am planning on putting it up for pre-order very soon. It's just because it's the finale of the series that it really has me overthinking, and it feels like a really big deal because whatever I do in this book is going to really define the series. Because if a series is really good but it has a crappy ending, that's what everybody remembers. Like even a series as amazing as Game of Thrones, everybody's like, yeah, I love it, but that ending though sucked. So I don't want to really flub the landing. And so I've been overthinking it so much and have just been really taking my time, making sure that what I want to do with that finale is what I will still be happy I did like a year later. But I've published 5 of them. The very first book that I ever wrote is also the first book that I ever published. And that book is called Imperfect. This is my book. This is my baby. I started writing this book when I was 13, I think, for real. I had been obsessed with YA dystopian books, obviously, because that was like the thing that everybody was obsessed with when I was in middle school. And I'd read The Hunger Games, The Maze Runner, Divergent, like all the really big ones, and was just absolutely obsessed. And I had been reading so many of them that one day I just thought to myself, why can't I just try writing one? Like I love all of these things, and it would be really fun if I could create like my own perfect dystopian book with all of the things that I really love. And so naturally, I became obsessed with this world because I was packing it with all these things that I really loved and that I was seeing in all of these other worlds, and combining them and coming up with new things and just creating like my absolute dream dystopian book. And that's what this is. The genetic modification plot is something that I'm still really creeped out by and really interested in writing about. So one day I will probably revisit this concept and just create a new story with the same general like feeling and ideas behind it, but just put my more mature spin on it now, because there is so much missed opportunity. I will be the first to say it. There were many issues with the world building that just like drive me crazy now. I love this book. It is the product of all of my teenage like loves and all of like that part of myself that just fangirled over these stories, and it's just packed with like idless stuff. If you've watched my video on like the psychology behind writing, you'll understand that it's just like jam-packed with all these things that I just personally loved in books. And so it really speaks to my id. But like from a technical standpoint, the prose was not firing on all cylinders. I'm proud of it for my age, but I also would have done many things differently in the world building, but it was my first experience and I wrote it between the ages of like 13 and 15. And so I'm cutting myself all kinds of slack there. But if I were to revisit it there, I mean, I have dreams about this book because there are things about it that I really love, but I would just approach in a completely different way. And I think I would make it a lot darker. And so there is like a little voice in the back of my head that really wants me to go back and revisit this at some point. It does not align at all with this brand of like paranormal mysteries that I'm building right now. But at some point, it's a passion project. I may go revisit it. But I was writing this book when I was still in school, and I would like go, I mean, I wasn't in school because I was homeschooled, but I would like go and I'd do my classes and my coursework. And I'd go to co-ops and take classes outside of the home a lot. So I'd go and I'd do those classes and like, in the margins of my notebooks, I'd be like writing down little ideas, and then I'd get home and I'd do my homework from those classes. And then after that was done, I'd stay up until like 2 or 3 in the morning every night, just like working on this. It was like my sacred little safe space time where I could just write and I didn't have to do homework and nobody would come bother me. And I was the only one still awake in my house. And I just loved that part of my day because I could fully dive into the world and into the story. So really the main thing, I mean, I learned so much writing this book. I learned first and foremost how much love goes into building these worlds and like how you can bring things to life based on like the love and enthusiasm that you pour into them. And if you combine all of these different things that you love to read about, that you love to consume in media, you can create a world that you yourself are fangirling over. And that passion comes through when people are reading your book. Because I got reviews of the book pointing out all of the inconsistencies in the world building that are completely valid, but I also got a lot of emails saying like, thank you so much, Claire, for writing this book that like made my 12-year-old daughter love reading again and fall in love with reading after she was like in a reading slump, or like, my 10-year-old daughter has dyslexia and she just like loved your book and hasn't been able to stop talking about it. And like those experiences and getting that feedback from people really made it worth doing and made me feel like I had taken this thing that I loved and I found other people that also loved it, and I was able to connect with them in that way. So it really taught me that passion and love is the thing behind the most successful stories. And you need to have that passion and love for your story if you want it to touch other people the same way that it touches you. I learned a lot about the importance of really digging into your world building and turning a critical eye. Like this is more after the fact, but after I published it, I realized that there were a lot of issues with just the way that I constructed the dystopian world. And it made me very detail oriented in future books. Like I did not want to have the same problem of overlooking like the technical aspects. Like Imperfect was very emotionally driven. It was not as much technically driven, but the technical aspects are equally important because they can pull people out of the story. So that is another thing that it really drove home to me. I learned a lot about how much work it is to sit down and write a book and rewrite a book and make edits to a book. And I also learned how scary it is to take something that you really love and put it out into the world and have other people critique it. I had wonderful and fantastic experiences doing this. I also had some really tough experiences that were really difficult for my 16-year-old heart to handle. And it was really important for me to learn how to navigate that discomfort and how every time you put a piece of art into the world, there are going to be people who love it and people who don't, and how to have a strong enough core and artistic belief in myself that I can stand by the work that I create and know that not everybody's going to love it, and that is okay. I'm a very sensitive person, and so that was a tough lesson for me to learn, but a very important one that has served me super well in the rest of my career up until now. I also realized how much I love writing characters and how characters are always the main focus of my writing. That was the part of writing Imperfect that I enjoyed the most, was digging into the character relationships and making the characters as real as possible. The memory is a little hazy as to like how many drafts I did and what exactly my process was like, but I know I did multiple drafts. I rewrote a ton of stuff. My best friend at the time was also very familiar with the world, and because I talked to her about it all the time, and so we came up and like bounced ideas off of each other, and she'd read the things that I wrote, and like she was a great like sounding board and hype girl for like finishing the book, and so that was amazing. But yeah, I got a lot of people that when I went and I told people that I was publishing Imperfect that said that I would regret it, like publishing a book in high school. I do not regret it. I've never regretted it a day in my life. I've always been so proud of myself for putting myself out there and for publishing this story because I was able to find people that loved it as much as I did. And also, I was just able to be brave enough to take this thing that I loved and put it out there and say, yes, I created that. And yes, now it is yours to read. And that has always been something that has brought me great pride. And I am just so, so glad that I did it. I've never regretted it. So after I finished writing Imperfect, I dove right into writing a completely different project that I have still never published, but that I spent years working on, like a really, really, really long time. And that book is called The Girl Under the Covered Bridge. It is called The Girl Under the Covered Bridge now. It went through like 17 million titles. It went through like 17 million revisions. I revised this book more than any book I'd ever worked on before. Obsessively, compulsively, like just trying to figure out a way that I could make it work. And it never really did. It worked enough, but it never worked enough for me to be super proud of it, like, and proud enough for me to want to publish it. The book is a young adult contemporary. I cannot share my screen because I have no visuals to accompany this. It's a YA contemporary that was inspired by reading like Vanishing Girls by Lauren Oliver, that tells a story of a 16-year-old girl. She has a twin sister, Penny. Her name is Mason, like Mayson, and she has a twin sister, Penny, and an older brother, Tommy. Was also Jamie. All the names of these characters changed like 10 million times too. And she and her twin sister Penny are like really, really close. And like she and Tommy are really close. Oh, and she has this best friend, Nate. And they're all like, they grow up together. And then this one horrible night happens where like Tommy gets into an accident and he gets paralyzed from the waist down. He's like a all-star hockey player. And Penny had been dealing with issues of addiction, and she overdoses and then goes to rehab the same night that Tommy has his accident. And Mason blames herself for all of it. And like the book kind of goes and develops, and then you see why she blames herself and why she's kind of at the heart of it. She's not really to blame, but like why she blames herself. And then it's the story of how she's able to heal her relationship with her family. And all the while, there's this ghost that haunts this covered bridge in their town. And like Mason has always believed in the ghost story. Like there's like a real like town legend around it. And then halfway through the book, she starts to actually like see the ghost. And then she gets her best friend Nate to come with her, and they like go ghost hunting. And then they actually end up seeing somebody. And then like the end of the book comes, and it turns out that like Penny was dressing up as the ghost, and then she was like messing with Mason, and like their relationship kind of becomes irreparable. And then Penny dies. Like they kind of almost end up recreating the lore story behind the reason why the girl at the covered bridge died in the first place. And then Penny is actually the one that dies. And then obviously Mason feels terrible. And then all this while, like she and Nate were like kind of in love with each other, but were never really able to tell each other. And then Nate and Penny dated for a while. It was just all very, very messy. So this book was a huge challenge for me because I had this story, like I knew the story, but it was very obviously character driven, but I really struggled trying to figure out the best way to tell it. Like I went through a bunch of different variations of it. Like I told it in the third person, I told it in the first person, never told it in the second person. I did alternating flashbacks for a while. So there was like a kind of post-accident timeline and then a pre-accident timeline. And then both of those would like kind of creep up until like at the end of the book, you find out what really happened that night in the flashbacks. And then you also like have that happen at the same time as like the real climax in the present day timeline, which I liked, but it wasn't very gripping for readers because there were so many flashbacks, and flashbacks are boring. And that is one thing that I learned while I was writing this book, is that like flashbacks can be boring. At least the way that I was writing them. I found them very interesting. I know there are books that pull this off well, so don't come at me with like, oh, well, in this book, this is amazing. It didn't work in this particular setting. I did not have the writing chops to be able to pull this off at the time. But this book just drove me crazy because it just really bothered me that I'd worked on it so much and I could never get it ready to publish. And so I became a little bit obsessive. And I became so obsessive that I wrote this book for my senior thesis in college. And I was like, this is the real thing this time. This is going to be it. Still wasn't it. I still haven't published it, and I still have no plans to. Every time I try to dig more into the ghost story and the lore, it would become a lot more scary, and then other like more comedic elements of it just didn't really fit. I still love it, and I still read it because it just makes me happy, but I don't have plans to publish it. I went so far as to like, I've worked with my line editor on it. I have this book. It's like in my computer. Maybe one day I can like beef up the ghost story element and then I can use it as like a free newsletter magnet. Maybe one day I will publish it. I just, it doesn't sit quite right to me. I think if I made it more of a ghost story and I made the whole girl under the covered bridge section a lot more powerful, then it might tie more into my They Stay brand. But for now, it's just sitting on my computer. But it did teach me a lot because I rewrote it in so many configurations. Just like the act of trying to figure out how to get the story to work taught me that like I really dig writing in the first person. My particular writing style and taste lends more to more immediate plots and more immediate stakes instead of the more like subtle character driven conflict where like a lot of the conflict takes place in the past. Oh, another way that I wrote it is just starting when they were kids and then growing up with them and then having the midpoint be the accident. So it was all just one timeline. But then it didn't really make sense as a young adult novel because when they start, they're like, 8. But yeah, this one taught me a lot about narrative construction and that not every single story, like it would have been, I think, like a great, more like literary fiction piece, just where like the pacing wasn't as intense. And I think now if I revisited it, I would have the skill to write it in a way that could be compelling, but it's not a high stakes thrill. It is way more of a relationship driven, gritty deep dive into like the psychology of the characters. I mean, another thing that I really tried to do for a while was like making Mason an unreliable narrator and then having her descriptions of like seeing ghosts and thinking that she's haunted be actually just her mental state devolving because she just like had some instability in her brain and her whole life fell apart when like the stuff happened to her siblings. So that was a really great exercise in like close point of view narration. And that's really what my thesis focused on, was like trying to figure out how I could show that she's an unreliable narrator and like through her first person narration. So as an exercise, it taught me a lot. I'm just not ready to publish it, and I don't know when I will be. Oh God, we're like 20 minutes in, and I haven't even started talking about the They Stay series. Buckle in, guys. We're gonna be in for one. So the third book that I ever wrote is probably the book that has changed my life the most up until this point, and that book is They Stay. To say I love this book would really be an understatement. To say this book is close to my heart would also be an understatement. I started writing They Stay in college. I first got the even like beginnings of the idea for it when I was a freshman and I did NaNoWriMo. I went on a trip to Norway the summer before I went to college, and we went to the Henrik Ibsen Museum, which seems like a very weird place to get inspired for this book. But I had this like idea for these characters of like this girl who was homeschooled and raised by her grandpa, and they like had a traveling Ibsen exhibit that they like toured the country with, and then she and her grandpa like took the exhibit to like a small fishing town in Maine, and in that town like a teenage boy had just gone missing, and the girl like goes to public school for the first time because she's like begging her grandpa not to let her be homeschooled anymore, and she meets these 2 cute boys, Miles and Jonah, and they all end up like kind of solving the mystery together for some reason, and the plot didn't really make any sense. They like ended up like Miles was part of like a poetry cult. Jonah was kind of like, like a Will Herondale type bad boy with a heart of gold. He hasn't changed that much. He got a lot grittier in the final version of They Stay. In the original, he was a little bit more of like, oh, my life is so hard, but I have like, a stable family and loving parents, but I'm just like a bad boy. And I just couldn't get those characters out of my head. Oh, and then there was one girl who could see ghosts for some reason. I don't know why. There's like a ghost theme, like in The Girl Under the Covered Bridge, and then also in They Stay, there were ghosts in both of them. And she could see ghosts, and she would just like sit on the porch of her house weaving these like tapestries. I have no idea. I thought like we're knitting. Like it wasn't knitting, it was weaving, because it was like in The Tale of Two Cities, like you had the people that do the knitting. I was like, oh, that would be cool if like I could have like a girl that does weaving, but like I'm pretty sure you like need equipment for weaving. Like I had no idea what I was talking about. And she would sit on her front porch, like watching things in town and be like weaving, but she was like a social outcast and no one would talk to her, and she could see ghosts. And so she solves the mystery before any of like the Miles, Jonah, and Astrid do. But she just doesn't talk to, like, she doesn't tell anyone. And then I think she was pregnant at some point. It was very weird. And then eventually she like tells Astrid who like kidnapped the boy, and then Astrid goes and saves him. But like she knew the whole time, so everything that Astrid, Miles, and Jonah did up until that point meant nothing, because this girl who was weaving just like knew what was happening. Very bizarre. So I had this book and I wrote it for NaNoWriMo, and I loved it, but it was just a dumpster fire. Like, I mean, I didn't love it, but I loved the main characters. And there was something about that girl that did the weaving that I just couldn't get out of my head. And I couldn't get those two boys out of my head, the Miles and Jonah characters. Astrid, TBH, was like a little forgettable. And so I knew that I wanted to publish books again. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I really wanted to start doing it after college. And so I thought that maybe just because I couldn't get those characters out of my head, if there was a way I could turn that idea into a series, and like it would have something to do with ghosts, because that was the part to me that was like the most compelling. Like, what if the ghosts are the reason that they're able to solve the mystery? And so I just started making tweaks. I was like, okay, this girl who can see ghosts has to be a lot more important. They had to have some sort of compelling reason to try to find the kid. Like, I didn't want it to be just a random person that just went missing at the school. Like, I wanted there to be some sort of real emotional drive for the main characters to go and find this kid. So I made it the main character's younger brother. I got rid of the whole Henrik Ibsen thing, and I set the book in like a fictionalized place. Like the place that the book is set is like, I made it a lot worse because it's a horror book. But it was initially inspired by like the area that I went to school in, because I like writing in areas that I've lived in, just because I kind of have an idea of like what they look like. And then I made it worse because it's the setting of a horror book, so it had to be like an unpleasant place to live. The real place is fantastic. The fictional place is not so fantastic, although it gets more fantastic by the end of the book. The main character starts out really not liking where she lives. I gave her a new name just for kicks, because I liked the name Shiloh a lot. And I kept Miles and Jonah and I gave them their names. And then the girl who could see ghosts was originally named Rochelle, but Rochelle and Shiloh was too many sounds. And so I named her Francesca, and still love that name. And those became the main four characters of the series. And from there, They Stay just kind of came together. I started drafting it in my fiction writing workshop. I originally like had a very long intro to They Stay. I had it take place over like, there were multiple chapters of them all being in school together before Max goes missing, like the first day. Like I spent a lot more time in the world, but that's typically what I do when I first write a series, is like I want to be able to know what happens like in that day of a life of that character in the ordinary world, and then I can edit it afterwards. And the story just kind of came together from there. It really took a lot of active brainstorming for me to figure out what I wanted to have happen, where, and why. And I ended up creating something that I'm really happy with. As a little bit of like behind the scenes knowledge, I actually went back in, because I'm very happy with the original They Stay. I love it. I'm super proud of it. But I have been running ads to book one of the series and have been getting some feedback that it's great, but it takes a little bit of time to really get into it, just because I think it's a little slow at the beginning. And that's not necessarily conducive to getting a lot of like read through, and like people like read a couple pages and they're like, oh, I'm hooked, I need to read more. So I recently, like just this fall, secretly played around with the opening of They Stay, and I completely rewrote the first half of the book. And I moved things around. The plot is the same, it's just the order of things are slightly different. And I tested that out in the month of October to see if people, like, it was converting better. And so far it has been. So I'm super happy about that. And I am really grateful that like I'm able to self-publish these books, and I just have the flexibility to go in and do that and run experiments and try that. I'm still collecting data on this. Like I'm not running any ads now because with the with the election and with the holidays and all of that, like Facebook ads become really expensive around Black Friday and like leading up to Christmas because there's just so much competition of people trying to run ads on promotions. But in the new year, I will start running ads again, and I will be collecting more data just to see if that's working out and if that new like revised opening is converting better than the old one. And if it is, then I will probably keep that and update that across the board. Right now it's just in the ebook version because that's where I get most of my conversions, or like when I'm running ads. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's like been through so many variations, but I like this one. It's just like an accelerated opening to the exact same story with the same characters and the same things happen. It's just like I moved around and cut out kind of like an unnecessary first step. So I blame TikTok brain, which I absolutely have, and I have no judgment towards because as a reader, I totally have this too. I think people's attention spans just can't handle taking a little bit of time to get into books nowadays. I think people want instant gratification a lot more, and they want something happening like every page in order to really grab their attention when they're reading commercial fiction. Obviously, this is not true for literary fiction, but across the board, I think people want things to be just a little bit more hooky. So that's what I'm playing around with. They Stay drove home this idea that like characters are story, and like the characters are the most important part of story, and without your characters, you don't have a story. And it also drove home this idea of like how important plotting is and how like this was the first book that gave me an understanding of plot structure where I really dug into the classic like inciting incident, midpoint, climax, resolution structure. I wrote it all through college, and I published it just like the fall that I graduated from college. So it's been a little while now. It's been out for a couple of years, and I'm still so proud of it. It's still my book baby, and I just love that story so much, which is why I went on to write like 4 more books in this world. Speaking of, let's go on to talk about the next one, which really, I'm sorry to say, it was like the bane of my existence. This is They Whisper. This is book 2 in the series, and this series writing this book just drove me up the freaking wall. I couldn't figure out how to write a sequel to save my life. I was so stressed out about it. Every time I would read it, because I originally planned They Stay Out to be a trilogy, but then I came up with this other idea to turn it into a 5-book series that I just fell in love with. And so this was like the middle book originally, how I'd conceived it, and just it was weird. I had like Leonard like kidnapping ghosts and like chaining them up, and he was gonna like sacrifice the ghosts to open a portal into like to go into the other side. And I'd written it and I sent it off to a developmental editor, and she was like, "This is really weird," like toward the end of it. And I'm like, "Yeah, it was really weird." And then I came up with a completely separate idea to completely overturn it about 3 months before I was supposed to publish it. And so I had to write the book from scratch, like in the 3 months leading up to publication. And those were probably some of the 3 like most stressful months of my entire writing career so far. I had set the release date to be 6 months away from They Stay's release. And I'd never written a book in that short amount of time. And I was just like, yeah, I can do it, because I'd started writing the book that summer. Like They Stay came out in October. I started writing They Whisper in like June. So it wasn't really 6 months. Like I had a lot more time. But yeah, that was extremely stressful. I was like, I had an outline, and thank goodness I had a decent outline, and I was like really happy with my outline. That could have been awful if my outline had been a disaster and I'd gotten to the end of the book and I realized this giant plot hole. It would have just been so bad. But thankfully my outline was fine. And I was writing like a chapter a day and sending it off directly to my line editor. Like I was sending him rough drafts of these chapters, and he was editing them, and he was like cleaning them up. And then I was going back over them and cleaning them up. But it was just like a race where I'd get up first thing in the morning and I just write the chapter. And this is before I'd really like figured out how to write quickly too. Like it just took a lot out of me to write and draft quickly. So yeah, that was great. But They Whisper definitely taught me that sequels don't have to be complicated, that your job when writing a sequel is to replicate the emotional experience of reading the first book. It's not necessarily to make things bigger. It's just to give the reader the same experience. So what I really wanted to do with They Whisper is just make it more of a thrill and make it like more fast paced and make it more personal for the main characters. Like in book 1, it's a little more external, like they want to save Shiloh's brother, but in They Whisper, the threat is now turned on them, and then they have to like save themselves because they're getting sucked way too deep into this thing. I made it more personal and I just made it more intense. So that taught me also that like deadlines are important, and also giving yourself some breathing room is important. I now do not set pre-orders until I have a draft of the book written, because otherwise it is just too difficult. I made that mistake with both They Whisper and with They Hunt. Never doing that again. I should already have pre-order out for They Die, or They Fall, or whatever I'm going to call book 5 that I'm still a little bit undecided on. I have a draft of it written. I know what my final revision is going to be. I have like some big revisions to make to it, and I know roughly how long that's going to take me, hopefully, but I still am just too scared to post a pre-order. But yeah, I honestly, I don't know. I love They Stay because of the nostalgia of everything. I love They Whisper because I'm just so happy with the way that that book ups the ante, and I just think it's the perfect sequel to book 1, and I'm super proud of it. They Return is book 3. They Return is my favorite book in the series, and I'm not ashamed to say it. They Return is the grittiest, most horror-filled book in the series, in my opinion. It goes to some really like creepy, dark places and has that like sideshow circus atmosphere that I just really, really love. And just the sheer amount of like creepy stuff that happens in this book, I eat it up. I love it. This book didn't take me actually, I spent about like a little bit longer on this book even than I did with They Hunt, I think. I started writing it in like end of March. I had my plot grid and I published it at the end of January. I was ready to publish it at the end of January. Like the book was absolutely ready. I just had so much drama with the arcs that year because I was in Australia visiting my family, and I couldn't be there in person to send out arcs. And so I decided to try to get it, like manage it through Barnes and Noble and send one individual arc, like printed arc, to every person on my arc team. And like I sent maybe, I don't know, 30 of them. It was a lot. And because I always prioritize doing print arcs for my arc team. And that like there were so many like some of them arrived in like 10 days and some of them arrived like after release day. It was just such a disaster. And then I printed the wrong ending. Oh my gosh, this is still one of the like worst moments. I cannot even tell you. I was like scream crying, hyperventilating when I realized that I did that, like a drama queen, because I wanted to make sure that like the ending, because the ending was really important. I had set up the wrong cliffhanger. And so I had to email my arc team. And this is like after I'd already like mailed them all the arcs and they were in process. I had to be like, hey, when you get to chapter 45, can you like switch to reading it on the computer? So I am always very careful to double check my files. And like, because I uploaded an older draft instead of like my most recent draft. Anyway, I love this book. This book, like the ending of this book came together. Hi, can you stop? The dog was making noise, so now he gets to come and join us. You want to say hi? The climax of this book came to me in like fully completed form and stayed through the final version of this book. It is my favorite climax that I've ever written. It is so perfect for each of the characters. Like they each have to like face their deepest fear and like overcome like their like deepest, darkest desire. And like the character growth in this one is awesome. I love it. I like this is my favorite in the series. Like I love every book in the series for different reasons, but this one still stands to be my favorite. This one is the book that really got me using plot grids in a very methodical way. Up until this point, I always did use plot grids, but in this book, I would create a new plot grid for every single draft that I did. I had to do that when I did They Whisper, kind of, but I was working with an outline that was like in a Word document. It wasn't a plot grid when I was doing my revision. But with They Return, I would draft it, and then I would re-plot grid it and redraft it and re-plot grid it and redraft it, because I had written like, I think when I first started writing my first draft, I overwrote the crap out of it, and I wrote up until the midpoint. And it was 90,000 words long, and so I had to go back to the beginning and try it again, and then go back to the beginning and try it again, and every time I'd create a new plot grid. And eventually I got to the ending, and I was so happy, and I like wrote the ending because it was the same like from the beginning, initial conception. I wrote it in like November of that year, all like in a couple of nights. I'd stay up really late, and I was just like word vomiting everywhere and having the best time of my life. So yeah, this one is like outlines. Like this one really taught me about outlines and had me honing my outlining process, and taught me about climaxes. This one gave me a system for writing climaxes, like in every climax of every book. And like sometimes it doesn't work out as clean as it does in They Return, and it just kind of drives me a little bit crazy. But like my goal, and I push myself really hard to try to meet this standard, it's like I call it my They Return gold standard, is that every single character in the climax has to face their deepest fear, and every single character in the climax has to like have a moment that like puts their character to the test to see if they've actually completed their arc. Like they should be faced with something that would like have been impossible for them to overcome or like make the right decision when faced with at the beginning of the book, and then they have to make the right decision when faced with that thing at the end of the book. So I had that like a very clear answer for each of my main 4 characters, and like the climax took place over like 10 chapters, and it was just like this never-ending high stakes climax that I still love it. It's like one of my favorite parts of this entire series. So then let's talk about They Hunt, which is the 4th book in this series. Let me find it. And I jumped into writing They Hunt like pretty much immediately after They Stay. After They Return. And there are parts of this book that I absolutely love. There are parts of this book that I wish I had done differently. This is the longest one in the series. It is, I think, like 155,000 words. It was 180 in my first draft. I brought it down to 155. There is a lot that happens. And not all of that, like all of it is really important, but all of it together doesn't necessarily create like the most thrilling. Like when I was listening to the audiobook, I was like, oh, this scene could have been summarized, or like this doesn't really need to be there. But I wanted to write it when I was writing it because I was just having so much fun with it. In my head, it's like They Stay like is really like kind of grounded in the real world. They Whisper, you deal with like possessed people kind of being the main threat to the kids. They Return, like Leonard is like the antagonist, is still like the main threat to the kids, and like the stuff he's putting Francesca through, and like his army of possessed people. Like he brings back a lot of his like friends from his circus days, and like in reanimated bodies that he's murdered, and like that is kind of an antagonistic force. In They Hunt, I dove way into like them becoming ghost hunters and learning about the mechanics of like how to fight ghosts. And so their like main threat is like actually supernatural. So this one goes way more into the supernatural. And that was really fun, digging into like the physics of ghosts and how they operate. I also loved diving into the character arcs in this book. They grow a lot in They Hunt. And then I got to explore a lot of really cool relationships, and a lot like some of the scenes in this book are my favorite out of all of the ones in the series. And I had a really good time doing it. I set a release date for They Hunt way too early. I was not expecting the book to be this long. I was like racing with They Return, They Whisper, that my partner was like, you absolutely need to build more of a cushion into your schedule. And I was like, yes, you're right. I need to build more of a cushion into my schedule. I'm going to give myself 9 months and not 6 months to write this next book. And then I wrote a book that was like doubly as long as They Whisper. So I was pushed too far that I had to skip my beta reading step, and that was a critical mistake because I had to almost use feedback from my ARC team as like a beta reading. And so I did an overhaul of the book, like between getting some ARC reviews in and when I published the book. And that was really good, but I wish I'd gotten that before my initial reviews went out and before like I sent it to my ARC team, because my ARC team is like my favorite super club of readers who I just absolutely love, and I want them to have like the best experience reading the book possible. And I know that they got a rougher copy of this one with some like errors and things that I wish I could have done differently. And so that is never happening again. I'm never skipping beta reading again, which is why I'm like, I have to wait to see how long the book is going to be before I set a release date. But I got to do a lot of fun stuff in this one, like ghosts in jail was really fun. All of the, like, mind control drug stuff was really fun. The romance was really fun. All of the ghost hunting was super fun. I loved doing that and had so much fun doing that. And, yeah, I followed my plot grid plan for this book. I was like, plot grid, outline, and that was super helpful. I loved doing that. I also because it was just so long and it would go on forever, I had, like, most of it written when I started with my line editor, but then I had to go in and start doing, like, a chapter a day just like I did in They Whisper just because I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, there's just so much of this book. I have to condense this timeline because 'cause I'm not gonna have time to, like, draft it and then have it all edited by the time that I need it to be." So that was stressful, but I think it really taught me more about, like, time management and how to be a little bit more, like, set myself up for success more, I think, in managing schedules for writing books in the series. And then They Stay 5 actually wasn't the next book that I wrote. I have written a completely different book that I'm actually working on right now. I'm not even working on They Stay 5 right now. I'm working on finishing this other book. And I have not really talked about it yet on the channel, but currently it's called Dead Girls Can't Cry, and it's a YA ghost thriller about a girl that gets murdered and she has to kind of like stop her own murderer in order to like escape purgatory. And it's both very dark and like Criminal Mindsy, and like she has to like use her knowledge of psychology to like figure out who the like why the killer is killing in order to stop him. And it's also got this like weird like sense of humor that's like almost like the good placey and like the way that I've structured the afterlife. So it's almost like, you know, if the Good Place and Criminal Minds had a baby. So it's kind of a quirky project. I love it. I think it's hilarious. And the characters in this one, I honestly like the relationship in this book, I think is my favorite potentially out of any relationship between two characters that I've ever written, which is a very bold statement because I love the characters and they stay. But these two really like have touched my heart and I'm really enjoying digging into this story with them. It's almost done. I'm like projected to finish it like this week or at least finish this draft. I'm going to have to read it through a couple more times. I'm planning on querying that to agents next year and just see what happens with it. I've never queried before or pursued traditional publishing in any way, so that will be interesting. But I know fans of They Stay are going to like this one because it has ghosts and has strong characters and is gritty and has tough relationships, but also has like some humor in it, which They Stay also does. But yeah, it's a cool project. I really like it. And it is the only standalone that I've written since The Girl Under the Covered Bridge. So that has been a little bit of a challenge, but I love the ending and I just think it's like perfectly wrapped up together and I'm very happy with the way that I've outlined it. So I'm writing the ending now because I can never write an ending until I've reached the end of the book. It just I need to like have everything set up exactly right for me to feel good about writing the ending because endings change so much. And then the last book and most recent book I guess that I've written, I mean, I kind of wrote these two in tandem this year. Like I did Dead Girls Can't Cry, They Stay 5, and the They Stay like first half rewrite this year, all kind of interspersed together. Like I do a month on, month off kind of with Dead Girls Can't Cry and They Stay 5. But They Stay 5 is the most recent book that I've written because I'm going to finish Dead Girls Can't Cry before They Stay 5. And gosh, I love that one. It's not the most stressed out I've ever been writing a book because I'm really happy with the vibes of this book. And I think that it's good and the bones are good. However, it is the most I've ever overthought a book in my life. And it's the most I've like felt the crushing pressure because I really feel a lot of pressure with this one because I just want the ending to be right. Not because I'm afraid that like, you know, oh, I'm going to get bad reviews. I'm going to have this. Like, yes, of course, that's like every author is worried about that. But I don't want to carry around a cringe every time I think of the last book in the series. I want to be able to look at that series and be really proud of the decisions that I made. And I don't want to be like, oh, I loved it, but I wish I hadn't done that. I don't want to have regrets. And I don't want to carry that because this is such a big accomplishment for me having these 5 books. And I'm so proud of them that I just want to do the characters justice by having the ending be right. So I'm going back and forth on a lot of decisions. I sent the book out to beta readers so they have a sense. If you beta read the book, you have a sense of what my initial thoughts are. But I will tell you right now that I have changed a lot of decisions that I've made after getting feedback and have now completely reversed which characters may be meeting their ends at the end of the series, as well as, I mean, not like reversed because there's no like opposite to what I did, but I've changed my mind about some characters' fates. And I think that it's going to make the book stronger. And like I've just sat with it now for about a month or like a couple of weeks. And the more I think about it, the better I feel about it. So I'm going to be getting to work next week after I finish Dead Girls Can't Cry on incorporating those edits. And I am jazzed about it and also very nervous, but very jazzed. And I don't know, I got some feedback. Like, I think I spent too much time on like certain characters in the book and not enough time on others. And so I need to change that and just digging into the nuances of the relationships there. So I'm going to take my time with it by taking like, I've already taken my time. It's been almost now a year since They Hunt came out. And so I really need to get it out and I can't push it off much longer. So I think I will probably end up releasing in March, maybe. I was really gunning for the end of this year, but I just, again, I don't want to have a cringe moment and I need to be able to take my time to do it right. So potentially March, hopefully sooner, but I don't think it's going to be sooner because I'm going to want to make sure that I nail those endings and have something that I'm really happy with and proud of and proud to share with everybody else. So I have like, I think I'm on draft like 3 maybe that I sent to beta readers. Like I'm pretty sure it was draft 3. So a couple more drafts to do before it's totally done, especially if I'm changing and like writing a lot of new stuff, because I think I'll have to write a lot of new chapters if I change like the pairings and like who goes with who where during the climax. I mean, during actually really the second half of the book. Like the first half I'm pretty happy with. I need to make some tweaks, but the second half I think might need to be completely written from scratch. So it'll be a big project, but I'm excited to dive back into it, and hopefully I'll have a finished book ready for everybody who wants to read it in March. Oh my gosh, that ended up being really, really long. I was not expecting this to be such a long video, so if you're still here watching this, thank you. I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy that you are interested in the projects that I've worked on. I know I mentioned this at the beginning, so I can just quickly shout out. I have written 3 short stories. One of them is a freebie from our mailing list, and it's a They Stay series story. And then 2 were short stories that I wrote in college that I was like, maybe I'll just like link them to this video. But then I reread them last night and I'm like, you know, they're a little embarrassing. So I don't know if I want to do that. Comment below if you really, really want to read them, and I will drop a link, like a Google Docs link, if you really want to read those short stories. They're both ghost based. As you know, I'm pretty obsessed with ghosts. So of course, everything I write has to have ghosts in it right now. But if you enjoyed this video, I'd be super grateful if you could give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you've watched this far, I think you already have a pretty good idea of who I am, but my name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos on this channel sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I am the author of all of the books that I talked about in this video today, along with the unpublished books that I also talked about this video today. And so if you're interested in hearing about my upcoming releases, I would also be super grateful if you could join my mailing list, which is linked in the description. You will then be the first to know if I have a new book out, or I'm running a promotion or a giveaway or anything of that nature, and just generally see what's going on in my writing and in my life. Get more pictures of this guy. He's a little camera shy. He's a little shy in general, but he's come a long way since I got him. He was a very fearful rescue. Want to say hi? Yeah, do you want to say hi? If you've published a book, drop the links to your book in the comments of this video. I'd be super interested to go check out your books. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody. And as always, happy writing.